Okay.
Are we live? Right now, we're live.
I still.
guess so. I love to get him aggravated. Don't you?
Oh, it's showtime. Okay, there's a little delay over here. But
Yeah,
cool.
there is. Okay. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Model Railroading Live. And it's Who's Big Bill talking to you tonight on March 18th, 2020. Model Railroading Live, the #1 model railroading show in the world, broadcasting live from the greatest city in the world, New York City, along Georgia, Missouri, and Iowa. We are fairly represented across the flyover states here. Just before we get to introduce who we're talking with tonight, who's our special guest, and I want to just let you know that tomorrow night on the 19th, that's Thursday evening, 9 p.m., you know, it's Johnny's Train Talk Show. And you guys can mosey on down to Johnny's general store there and pull up a chair and be like this, like where you see us here. We're all on the screen. You guys can do that too, you know, and be a part of the Johnny's Train Talk Show where you can bring and brag if you're making something or you've done something or you want to show off something. You can do that, or you can be on the Q&A and ask tons and tons of questions. And anything related to model railroading. If you're having a problem with electronics, track, we got a bunch of guys out there that know a lot of things and are willing to help out everybody. So that's tomorrow night on the 19th of March at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is Johnny's Train Talk Show. Just come on down to the general store, pull up a chair, grab a cold soda pop out of the fridge. Now you're ready to go with Johnny's Train Talk Show. So with much ado, let me get on with this. Tonight, Who's Big Bill talking to? Our special guest is Scott Thornton from Iowa Scale Engineering, and he and his group of compadres over there have really set the model railroad. They've reinvented the wheel, basically, I would say, is Scott Thornton and the Proto Throttle. I say that fast 4 times. So Scott, welcome to Who's Big Bill talking to. Along we have Miles Hale, who's joined us, and to just to make sure that I don't make any mistakes, technical or modeling wise, otherwise, because I tend to put my foot in my mouth at times. But yes. Okay, so John has asked me if you guys would just hold tight for a couple of seconds, couple of minutes while he reboots and gets this thing back on live. Because when you're live, Mr. Murphy showed up. You know that son of a gun, Mr. Murphy. So just be patient, hang in, and we'll get with Scott and talk about the Proto Throttle in a moment. Go. Hey, it's Model Railroading Live once again. I ain't going over the intro, bros. This is Model Railroading Live. This is Big Bill. We're doing Who's Big Bill talking to tonight? And tonight we're talking to Scott Thornton.
Mm-hmm.
I only remember the last name, Scott, because of John Wayne in The Quiet Man. His name is Thornton.
Yes, I remember that.
Well, we have Scott Thornton with us from Iowa Scale Engineering, and he and his group there at Iowa Scale have come up with something really amazing. I think that it's better than sliced bread, and you know the guys in the sliced bread company are having a fit over this because the Proto Throttle has been introduced. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Good to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. We also have Miles Hale with us tonight, Professor Miles. Thank you so much. He's here to make sure that I don't screw up anything technical or make a total donkey out of myself. But
well, then, in terms of technical analysis, I've totally failed so far, right?
Okay. Well, no, that's on the YouTube. That's not on us.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's on YouTube. If any of you guys have come in and you've noticed that we had a little bit of a glitch going on here, and we got it worked out. We're apparently live as of right now on YouTube. I don't think so on Twitch. of yet, but we've worked it out where we are now live on YouTube. So, guys out there, we're gonna proceed. So, Scott,
Yes.
thank you so much for being a part of this show. As we were talking last night, the advent of I remember when I was getting back into the model railroading back in the 80s, DCC was starting to make, headway. They were like putting it out the magazine and everything. And now recently, you've kind of brought the game to a new level with this throttle thing going on. Can you tell us a little? I first and foremost think it's a great addition to model railroading. Can you just give us a little background on how this came about?
Sure. Yeah. I appreciate your comments. Yeah. Several years ago, well, first of all, I'm a diesel modeler. So, sure. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. Sure. I'm a diesel modeler, and a number of years ago, I saw a YouTube video by a fellow named Bruce Turner, and Bruce lives in Arizona. I believe he's retired, but Bruce is an engineer, and he took an NCE throttle and he put together a Rube Goldberg like control stand, and it looked very much like a control stand, and it got me really excited because I always thought that rather than the push buttons and the rotary knobs that we're so accustomed to using in model railroading, wouldn't it be great if you could have an actual miniature wireless control stand that you could use to run your diesels, just like the prototype? So I saw Bruce's video and I was really inspired. And at the time, I had become friends and was working alongside Michael Peterson and Nathan Holmes. And those two fellas are native Iowans, and they started Iowa Scaled Engineering. And they're both electrical engineers, and they were producing electronic products for model railroaders. And I was working with them, helping them with some of their advertising because I'm a designer by trade. And I asked Michael, I said, do you think, I showed him Bruce's videos, and I said, do you think we could reproduce this, maybe for me, for him, for Nathan? And so he agreed. He said, yeah, let's give that a shot. So that was the inspiration for the Proto throttle. And this was probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. I may have that wrong. I'm getting to the age where I don't remember time frames well anymore, but but that was the inspiration, and we started to put our component list together and start to develop how the throttle might look. And as we went along, after about half a year of development, we had a crude prototype, and we're both prototype modelers. And so we thought, well, we'll take our crude prototype to some of the RPM meets, which we did. And we got some positive feedback from those folks at the RPM meets. And so that encouraged us that this product might be something that other diesel modelers would embrace. And so that's really the kind of the short answer for the, excuse me 1 second. So that was the inspiration, and so it went from there.
Yeah. Well, we just interrupt you. Andy Crawford just got home, and this makes absolute sense. Everybody is home because of this virus situation, because nobody's allowed to leave. So everybody's on the internet.
Yep.
So this is probably what's causing our problem here. Is everybody is on. No, are we still live, John? Okay. So we can. All right. So that's probably the reason why. So, just so I'm sorry, Scott, you were saying.
Oh, that was it. I'm sorry, my phone rang and I got interrupted,
Oh.
but I forgot to mute my phone. And so that was the inspiration for the throttle. And then we took about a year and a half to develop the throttle before we sold the first one, and it's kind of gone from there. We've been marketing the throttle now for about 2 years, and we just recently sold our 500th unit, and we seem to be gaining a little bit more traction, that exponential curve. More
Yes.
people are starting to learn about the throttle, and it's exciting. The three of us enjoy doing it, and it's just a fun thing to do, and it's exciting to see diesel modelers embrace it and enjoy it. And we've had I can honestly say we've had virtually all of our customers say that the experience of using the Proto throttle puts them in the cab and really adds a new dimension to their modeling operations. And so that's really exciting.
Scott, do you have a throttle? You have your own throttle. Could you show it? Freddie Model Railroad would like to see it. Show the
Yeah,
throttle.
yeah, sure. This is my personal throttle. So I went ahead and the throttle doesn't come with weathered or beat up like this one is, or it doesn't come painted in seafoam green. But I painted mine in seafoam green because the diesels that I model are from the era where a lot of cabs were painted that color, and so that's why I have this green beat up. I wanted my control stand to look like the real thing that you'd see in the cab. So I'll give you just a quick little tour of the throttle itself. It's got a spring-loaded. Well, first of all, I should say we tried to emulate the prototype as closely as possible, and we based the Proto throttle on the control stand of a Jeep 15, EMD Jeep 15. So we've got a spring-loaded horn handle. So you press it and it springs back. It's like the prototype. And then we have a latched bell, because on the prototype, most of the bell buttons, you pull it. It's like a plunger type control. You either pull it and then you push it. So
Right.
it's latched. So that's the bell right here. And then we have the throttle handle, which is fully detented. That means that every notch clicks just like the prototype. So it's all segmented that way. So it's got all 8 positions plus idle. And then we have a reverser that's also detented. So this is neutral. And then you've got forward and reverse. And then we have a variable brake. This is disengaged. This is fully engaged. And it's resistive, so it has a little bit of a resistance feel in the brake, like you'd get with a real brake. And there's not really a good way to emulate the train brake. So you could think of this as the independent brake or the train brake, because it obviously in model form it stops the train. So, and then we have front and rear independent lights, and these switches go from off to dim to bright and to bright with ditch. And then in addition to that, we have a LCD screen here and 4 control buttons, plus this big auxiliary button, which is latched as well, like the bell. And the auxiliary button is a nice feature. For example, modelers who use Loc sound decoders, for example, they can use this auxiliary button to have the speed, what's it called? Full throttle. So you can click on that and lock in your speed. And then these 2 buttons on the, actually on this side, on the right side, these 2 buttons are programmable to other functions when they're not being used as programming buttons. So when you turn the throttle on, you get a little bit of a little intro. I don't know if you can see that. It might be too bright. And then it goes to the screen. And that's the layout of the throttle. So, and then we also have a lanyard here. And then we also include what's called a love handle. It's a little like cell phone strap that you can connect to the back of the throttle to slip a finger in the back, and it makes it very comfortable to hold the throttle. The throttle only weighs 2 ounces more than an NCE hammerhead throttle. So that'll give modelers an idea. And as you can see in my hand, it's not that large. It's comfortable. So
yeah, Lambertino says it's fun to use. I have a coal hauling layout with a 3% grade with helpers. It's like operating a real train.
mm-hmm.
And Andy Crawford said, I just got mine today. It is beautiful.
Oh my goodness. Thanks, Andy. I appreciate that.
And Mike Lambertini says again, I'm receiving my second one on Friday.
Wow, thanks.
How do you, Sparky 107 says, how do you access all the other functions? Some have 28 functions.
Right. Now, that's a good question, because what we have attempted to do with the Proto Throttle is only emulate what you would find in a real cab. So we do not, it's not like your normal controller where you can access, 28 or more functions. This isn't going to throw switches. It's not going to turn on signals. It's not going to do all these auxiliary type features. It only does what the prototype does. But with that said, like I said, there's 3 buttons in addition to the purely prototypical controls that allow you to add some additional functions that you can control with the big gray auxiliary button and the 2 on the side of the LCD. But that's we weren't trying to create a throttle that was like all the other DCC throttles. We were trying to make it as prototypical as possible. So
that's correct. Dwight of Northern Star Railroad Line says, can you plug this throttle into any system, any other system?
Well, it's not. You need to think of the Proto Throttle as just an additional throttle to your DCC system. We have 2 wireless receivers that the throttle we have 2 different receivers, and between those 2 receivers, they cover all the major DCC systems. So, for example, if you're operating NCE, you would buy the receiver that goes with NCE, and the NCE receiver just happens to be virtually plug and play. So you'd plug it into your DCC bus on the NCE system. The Proto Throttle talks to that receiver, and then the receiver talks directly to the NCE CPU. And that's how the throttle works. It's not a standalone DCC system. It's right. just an additional throttle.
If I'm using the throttle on my NCE, and say I have an operational night and I have the other guy, my other partner over here, does it interfere with the cab? Does it interfere like I use for
right.
for operators? Does it interfere? Can I still operate? He can operate on the other side?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because the Proto Throttle talks to its own receiver, which uses radio receiver. They're called it's an XB receiver. If people are curious, they can just Google XBEE, and it operates on a certain frequency. Michael or Nathan would know what frequency, but it's pretty robust. Like, it will transmit up reliably up to 600 feet, so it covers virtually all model railroads, and it will communicate well through walls and that sort of thing. So it is in essence, I guess you could say, it's totally independent of. It doesn't interfere.
Yeah.
Can I ask a double question on it?
Sure, go right ahead.
if you get the throttle and you have the receiver that's going to plug into your NCE bus, and Bill comes down from New York to operate on my railroad, and he brings his throttle down, do I need another receiver, or will that receiver receive the signals from several of the throttles? In other words, is it dedicated, or does it take, if I had 6 throttles in the room, would only one receiver be needed?
Yes, that's correct. That's another good question. Thanks, Miles. Yeah, you only need one receiver, and multiple proto throttles operate on that receiver. Now, one thing I should mention is the proto throttle, because of its very nature, we can get into this in more detail as the discussion goes on. But you have to set up your locomotives, if you want them to operate hyper prototypically, in a certain manner that your other locomotives on your that you might not normally set them up as. For example, you want to max out your momentum on the decelerators when it decelerates, because when you go to idle on the throttle handle, you want that locomotive to coast for as long as possible, because that way you utilize the variable brake to engage the brake. And the beautiful thing about the proto throttle and how it operates prototypically is, with that momentum so high, once you go to idle and you're coasting along, just like the real thing, you can apply the brake, and then you can knock the brake off, and the engine will slow down. You knock it off, and it'll keep moving because of the momentum at that slower rate. Now that, in our opinion, is hyper realistic, because that's exactly what the prototype does. It isn't, and you have much more control over your engine, because with lever action, it's easier to know where you're at,
You're absolutely correct on that.
Control the speed of the locomotive, versus a knob, which is, the knob typically, you're kind of in la la land. You don't really know where you're at in terms of a full stop or that sort of thing. So the proto throttle makes it, modelers really like that feature.
So if I were going to visit at a railroad, I would want to take my engine, which is already programmed to that maximum momentum, and put that on, and his receiver should receive, and my engine and my throttles that I bring still would operate okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the neat thing. That's what a lot of people do, Miles, is they'll bring their engines that are fine-tuned for the proto throttle to the layout, and they'll operate that way. Now, I should also say that layout owners, a lot of them who have embraced the proto throttle, have started to pick their decoder of choice and then move toward that decoder as they add more motive power, or switch out the decoders to make their layouts decoder specific, because it's much easier to program consists and things like that with consists that have the same decoder. When you start to mix all these different decoders together, and as we all know, even though there's NMRA standards for DCC, the decoder manufacturers don't follow those standards. And I mean, some do, but some don't. So you get this mix, and it gets, you can get locomotives to work well with the throttle in consists, but it's much easier if you have them all using the same decoder. So
all right, then I have another question for you. When I was actually a switchman, and I was for a few years, Bill used to be a motorman for the railroad there in New York City. If I were switching on a switch crew, and this is a problem that I normally have with momentum, if I would tell my engineer to kick it, in other words, he's going to wrap that thing up at throttle 6, 7, 8, he's going to really rip on it to give me a push, because all of our switching in San Antonio, which is where I was at the time, was flat. So you had to get some speed up. The pin would have been pulled on the car, the lever for the coupler control, and the car would have been allowed to roll. And then you tell the engineer to stop, and he pulls his brake on. If you're using a normal momentum throttle, you can't do that, because the momentum keeps that engine rolling too much. And you can't put it in emergency stop because that throws everybody in. So what I'm hearing from you is that your throttle will take that throttle 8 kick move, and then I can use the brake then once I throw the throttle back into idle, which is what the engineer would do, throw it into idle and then use his engine brake then to brake the engine and stop whatever cut of cars he still had a hold of, or to stop himself and let the cars roll on into the track. And that's possible?
Well, I don't know about rolling cars because I don't know if your car would roll that far, but you can simulate everything up to the car roll that you're talking about.
Okay.
I don't know how you can if you can figure out how to make a model car roll, that'd be awesome, because then we'd all be in model railroading heaven. Because then we could
try Katie's or Central Valley, but that's a topic for a different subject.
Sure. No, but
yeah,
you could do.
I kick all the time when I go over here to operate at Gary Hankins and some of the other places. They don't necessarily like it, but because that's the way I was taught and the way I actually switched, I still flat switch in those model railroads. I kick them. You bet.
That's awesome. Yeah, you can simulate that. In fact, I've got my engines. I have short wheelbase switchers, and I've got the decoders programmed for that type of switching, and it works fantastic, Miles. I think you'd really enjoy it. Another thing is you can, for those who are familiar with compressed speed curves, the Proto throttle works extremely well with compressing your speed curve. So, for example, if, like for me, this is kind of hard to describe in a sense because we all use different decoders, but I'll just talk about ESU loc sound. That's what I use on my layout. So what I do is I use the loc programmer, for those who are familiar, and I go in and I access my speed curve within the decoder, and I flatten it out. So at about notch 4 or 5, the maximum speed that my engine will run is roughly, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 miles per hour. And you'd be really surprised when you see an actual scale 10 miles per hour. It's pretty darn fast on the layout. Yes. A lot of guys misinterpret speed, and they think that when a train's running a scale 10 miles per hour, they think it's actually going about 25 or 30. But 10 miles per hour on a model railroad is pretty fast, scale miles per hour. So I max it out at the 10. It's a very comfortable speed to be moving down the line. And that speed curve is flattened to about mid range in its full exponential curve. Okay, if you can imagine an exponential curve right in the middle, it's cut off to max out, and that coordinates with, like I said, about notch 4 or 5. Now the beauty of that is when you go to fire up your switch engine, let's say you couple up to 5 or 6 cars, you can go up to notch 6, 7, 8, and you've got some extended acceleration, a momentum on your acceleration. So that engine's going to sound like it's really working to overcome the inertia. Then as the cars get moving, you notch down to, let's say, notch 3. Okay, now your engine's moving down the line, and it's increasing up to that 10 miles per hour, notch 4 or 5. You go down the line, and let's say you encounter a grade. Okay, so now you've got it in notch 4. You're running at your speed on your model locomotive is maxed out. You get to that 1.5% grade. You don't even have to worry with a compressed speed curve with the Proto throttle with your to simulate that engine working harder going up the grade, because now you can notch up to 6 or 7 going up that grade. Your prime mover will ramp up, but your speed won't vary. And that's another way of getting hyper realistic operation with the throttle, by just compressing that speed curve for a little bit. And again, when you go downgrade, you can just shut her down to notch 2, 1, or even idle. And with that extended momentum, especially since our layouts are compressed, you could conceivably coast for quite a long distance, maybe just giving a little puff of prime mover, if you will, as it's coasting down. So you can get that again, that hyper realistic operation with the throttle. It's pretty fun.
That, you know, everything you just described and what Miles was saying is absolutely. I could see the advantage of having this throttle. You know, on this on having it in my possession. You know, because it's the same. It's the same. It's the same. Like I was telling you the other night, the inertia of, you know, the actual movement of the train. You know, people. You know, it always amazes me when, you know, the feeling you get when you start the diesel up and you get ready to go. I mean, it's a different. You know, as much as it's not the same as many people tell me often and a lot that. You know, working on the New York City subway system and operating the diesel and whatever is not the same as a major railroad in the United States. But I always go back to the thing of, like, you know, did you ever have a boss? Did you ever work with a guy and he became a boss and he forgot about all the, you know, to sign out for him because he had to run an errand? And, you know, it's the same thing. It's regardless of what railroad you're on, you know, it's the same thing. So it's like, but that actual inertia, like when you start the engine and it starts to move and you get that bucking and that movement, and then you got the train under your control.
Right.
That's the whole thing, you know, is under your control. And that's what this, I believe, this throttle gives you. It gives you that exact, if you will, an emotional feeling of like, I am controlling this. I'm controlling this diesel.
That's right. And you could, just to add one more element to the prototypical operation, is some diesel electrics will engage. They'll actually start moving not in notch 1, but in notch 2. In fact, the majority of diesels will do that. So, as you guys know, you operated them. So you can simulate that because there's controls within the proto throttle to have you where you can precisely coordinate the prime mover notching with the speed of the locomotive. So you, in essence, if you wanted to, you could notch up, you could move to notch 1 and have that prime mover charge, if you will, but it won't move. Then you go to notch 2 and then you start to see movement. Or if the locomotive charged quicker than that, then you could do it at notch 1. So you have that variable as well. So there's a lot of advantages to it. Now, most modelers get very excited about the brake. The brake is what is a key feature of the throttle that gets the hardcore diesel modelers especially kind of losing their minds, because when you can actually apply a brake and knock it off, that is very exciting to those kind of operators. So that's one thing that we have a lot of fun with.
So if you have a model railroad or you're operating on someone's model railroad as a steep grade going down, and everything, the brake line fails and the brake fails, and you're all screaming and you're yelling into the radio for the tower operator to turn everything green. Does that work too? I
don't know.
We had a friend of mine, Frank. He's retired, 35 years as a motorman. He worked on the diesel, and one time they were taking continuous welded rail heading back to the 38th Street yard, and they were coming down the Manhattan Bridge. And luckily for him, the tow operator was a pretty savvy old timer, and he set everything to green. Everything. He lined up the track all the way down, and they lost control of the diesel. They threw the train line brake, they threw the diesel brake, they threw the anchor out, they threw everything out.
Wow.
It screamed down the bridge, went screaming through DeKalb Avenue, morning rush hour, through the tunnel. Boom. They ended up slowing eventually down at 36th Street.
When they got a grade, yeah. Well,
I said to Frank, what was that like? He said, well, He says, I stood up, I curled my toes, and my butt was puckered.
Yeah, I think my butt would be puckered too. But that brings up another point, Bill, is that with the Proto Throttle on the brake, you have the option of having an emergency brake, and I mean like stop on a dime emergency or not.
Right.
So if you swung it all the way to fully engaged, it will go to that emergency stop.
Yeah, well, if I truly believe if we want prototypical, and I mean real prototypical, and Miles can attest to this, you got to have a few close calls. You got to have that thing where, like, if you're going to sit in that barber's chair, you are eventually going to get that haircut. So like, let's have the real thing. Let's have that. So when it's all finished and done, with this thing, with this Proto Throttle, we should have set some things up on our layout where it happens so that the guy who's operating on that throttle can walk away with his T-shirt and his shirt soaked and like, don't ever do
Can I ask for something in the future? Since you're the designer, you got a couple of electronic geniuses up there in the Iowa cornfield. If they build it, they will come, and you've discovered that. I assume with the throttle. So take it one step further, go for a home run. About dead rail, obviously.
Yes.
Is there any plan, or would you consider a plan to have that radio unit, since you already have a radio throttle, that would talk directly to the engines in themselves, i.e., when SCAB came out, he reverse engineered on an NCE decoder, and his receiver then puts the signal coming from his throttle in language that the DCC decoder understands. So he's not rebuilding a decoder. He's simply taking his signal and putting it directly to the locomotive, so the locomotive does not have to pick up through the track. Now, additionally, he also, of course, has a battery on there that will then power the unit and keep it going no matter what. I mean, you can run it on a tabletop. But to me, that would be the ideal, is your throttle talking by radio with battery power, not needing any kind of track wiring at all. That's a real locomotive, because trust me, I've put them in the dirt and they still run in the dirt. They don't care if they're on the track.
Yeah, that's there's a G-scale modeler, outdoor modeler, who's done that with the Proto Throttle. In fact, he's helping other G-scalers utilize it. I think he uses, is it air wire? Is that right?
Yeah, air wire. Yeah.
Right. And he figured out a workaround with the Proto Throttle so that he could run his G-scaled locomotives that way. So it has been done. I should also that brings up another good point, though, Miles, is that the throttle was developed totally open source. So if you have the technical know-how, like this other gentleman did, I can't recall his name right now, but you could add your own functionality to the throttle if you wanted to, because everything is open. All the files are on GitHub. You could go there, you can take a look and have at it. So,
well, I always tell everybody, you're way beyond me. I was a PE teacher, and I really was. But it might be possible then to put out the signal at the same wavelength, or whatever you call it, that the SCAB is on, and actually talk to an SCAB receiver.
Could be. I would imagine it could be done. Yeah, that's.
I don't know, because like I say, I'm a PE teacher, but it sounds possible then.
Yeah, that would be a good question for Michael or Nathan. They're the electrical engineers. I'm not at the same level as those guys.
Yeah, no, I'm not even in the ballpark.
Yeah, me either.
What's his Andy Crawford wants to know. He says, will Iowa Scale Engineering be selling the wheel squeal device that you were showing on the blog recently?
Oh, that's on my own layout. Yeah, that's my flange squeal system. I don't know. They Michael and Nathan built that as a one-off module for me. They've built me a lot of interesting electronics. I also have I also simulate cloud shadow moving across my layout via those two brilliant gentlemen. So I've added some unique features to the layout. But to answer his question, he'd have to ask Michael directly, and you can contact Michael. It's Michael Peterson, and if they send an email to support@iascaled.com, that goes directly to Michael, and he can ask him that question. I don't know. He might say yes. He might say no. I'm too busy. I'm not going to answer for him, but I asked and he helped me out. So
There you go. MHO Junction, Lloyd Hinckley. Hey, Lloyd. He says, I have an NCE. What would be the total cost to have everything working?
okay. Well, the throttle costs $482, and then the receiver for whatever DCC system you use costs $99. So for what, $581, you'd have the whole system. Now, as you and I talked about, Bill, the other day when we met for the first time, and we encounter this a lot. A lot of modelers will balk at that price. They'll say, "Oh my goodness, that's pretty expensive." But and it is. It's quite an investment. But at the same time, we like to compare it to something equivalent. And what we've used over the last couple of years is we've told modelers that it's the same as if you purchase two sound-equipped HO scaled locomotives, because the costs are basically equivalent. So for the cost of two engines with sound, you could have that type of prototypical operational functionality on your layout. And another thing with the throttle is we didn't cut corners on quality. For example, we insisted on having a anodized aluminum faceplate for the throttle because we wanted it to feel like a real control stand. So we used actual metal, no plastic. The handles are machined aluminum, and then the color on the handle is plastic, but that's a small part. And then the printed circuit boards are robust, well constructed. So it's a well put together piece of engineering, and we feel that it's the price point where it is actually where we had to have it at. Everything's produced in the USA. Nothing is shipped out of the country. It's a very niche product. Even though we've sold just a little over 500 of the units in 2 years, just as a comparison, we found out that NCE, over the life of their business, they've sold over 125,000 throttles, if I'm remembering correctly. So the comparison is we're not in it to build this big business, because it's never going to do that. It's a niche. So but it's like
no, go ahead. I'm sorry,
Scott. No, I was just going to say it's just high quality. It's high quality.
Right. I believe it. Lloyd says, MHO Junction says, that's $1,000 Canadian money. He goes, ouch. Andy Crawford replies, no doubt it's not cheap. It's definitely a specialty, low volume produced product, but it's a very well built and likely won't appeal to 90% of regular modelers. It's very tailored for proto operators. To which Lloyd replies, more like 99%, and which is true. He says, yes, likely, but Andy replies, but that 1% specialty market is probably bigger than they can produce.
Well, that'd be nice. We'll see.
Yeah.
So far we've sold them fairly consistently, and like I mentioned, virtually I can't think of any customers that have. There's been maybe a couple customers that just couldn't get the hang of the programming, and then they abandoned the throttle. But well over 99% of our customer base, once they use the throttle, they swear to us they'll go back to their regular throttle. Now, that's nothing against regulars or modelers that use it.
Right.
This is a hobby where the priority is having fun and enjoying the hobby, and certainly aren't going to say you're doing something wrong if you don't use a proto throttle.
Right.
But those who use it really, really enjoy it.
Cool Tropolis Model Railroading wants to know, does it come with a warranty?
Yes, we have a 1-year warranty, but what we like to tell our customers is we'll take care of you forever, because we're just 3 modelers and we all have similar viewpoints toward customer service. It would drive me bananas if I didn't take care of somebody who bought our throttle, and I think Michael and Nathan feel the same way. So we'll go above and beyond for our customers. Now, everybody says that, but you'll just have to take my word for it. It would drive me nuts, and we'll just take care of you.
See, if I was the one that invented this, my warranty would be as soon as the check cleared. That's as far as.
Is that a New York attitude, Bill? Come on.
Yeah. That like if you came to my house and picked it up, as soon as your tail lights went around the corner, that's when that warranty ended. Right there.
Oh my goodness. Oh.
Cash in hand. That's it. Goodbye. Take it easy.
Yeah. Well.
Sparky. Well, that's why, thank God, I'm not an entrepreneur. Sparky asked a question earlier, and then we got lost. He wanted to know, can you take this throttle to a club layout?
Yes, and there's plenty of modelers that do. So. Right. Well, he'd have to. The NCE receiver and the Digitrax receiver, those are the 2 different receivers. One of the receivers covers NCE, lens, DigiKeys, and the other receiver handles ESU, Digitrax, MRC, JMRI, and along those lines. So I may be missing one, but we cover all the major DCCs. So if and we have had modelers who've purchased both receivers so that they can interchange, like they can go to a friend's house who has Digitrax, maybe they're running NCE. So that might be a disadvantage in terms of cost, but guys are doing it.
Yeah. Eric Hall, IMRO.com. Eric, just to answer your question, Eric says, his buddy Bruce made his own version of this Proto throttle 8 to 10 years ago using an NC cap as a base unit. Earlier in the show, Scott, when he came on, he said that was his genesis for his idea of building the Proto throttle, of seeing Bruce's video. So
yeah, that was Bruce Turner, right. And I've talked to Bruce, and he's a very nice gentleman, and he was very encouraged that we were inspired by his videos, and so we've corresponded with Bruce. He's a great guy. He's enthusiastic for what we're doing, and thank you, Bruce.
Yeah. Let's see. Sparky says the price is more than a local DCC. Canadian wise, perhaps. Yes, maybe.
Yeah, but then again, if you look out there, I think TCS just put out a new handheld throttle, and I think it retails around $200 and some, and I know some of the other DCC throttles can get up closer to $300. So, right, it might be close to double one of those throttles, but again, you have to weigh, if you want that type of prototypical approach to operations. That's just where we're at, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Andy Crawford says, so it's a low volume, high margin, just as I would if I were producing it, since it's not trying to be all things for all people. It's targeted at a specific audience like myself,
Right. And you have to remember, the original goal was to build maybe 2 or 3 of them. And that was the original goal. And when we decided to market it, it was a decision made not to build a business per se, but rather just to provide something to the modeling community that would be paradigm shifting for them.
Yeah. Ron Bryce of Australia said that's just over 1,000 Aussie dollars.
Yeah, it is expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking about shipping it halfway across the world and the different countries' tax structures and that sort of thing, you know, I know some of our Canadian customers, it's a little bit more challenging to make the investment, but
yeah, well, I agree with you. Andy Crawford says you got to watch some of the videos like the Seaboard Central guy and watch how he operates with it. It will win you over if you're into prototype operations. Now, Sparky 107 comes and his reply is the price needs to come down since it's based off other DCC systems that we need Wi-Fi systems for. It is not independent.
yeah, I can assure modelers that the price, we just can't have, it's just not going to come down. So you know, and again, that's not to be negative toward those modelers who might be interested in it. It's just a matter of producing the throttle at the quality that we would like, and not, you know, again, it's a niche product. It's never going to be the type of thing where we, for example, go over to China and produce thousands of these things in hope that the market would purchase, because I don't think the market's there for that, you know.
No, you're right. I think that John 2618 says you definitely have to hold one in person and operate it. It feels good to use. You know, again, I think it's, you know, I think again, it, you know, people look at the bottom line, and I get it. You know, we don't have discretionary funds, but you know, if we're willing to do, you know, listen, you know, we all have jobs that pay, and I'm not saying this is what you got to do, but I know that if I needed something when I was working, I put the OT in. That OT was my what I was going to buy, you know, and stuff like that. So yeah, can you justify spending that kind of money? Probably not. Probably not. But if it's something that makes, if you're into your hobby and you want to do it, you know, not. You know, the one thing I've come to, and this is just my personal opinion, community, not necessarily yours. Every time I've seen a funeral go by, I've never seen a U-Haul trailer behind the hearse. So you're not going to be able to take it with you. It's not going to come with you. So if it's something you really enjoy and you can put money together without hurting the family, the finances, the budget, and you put your pennies aside, you most likely can do it. I'm not advocating that you go out and buy this. I am just saying that if there's a will, there's a way. If you want it, you'll get it. We've all been there. We've all done that. We can't take it with us when we go. You know, yeah. Right now in this, you know, now we're in a robust economy in this country, so we can do it. And with this virus thing going on, things are. And by the way, if you're a U.S. citizen, we get $1,000.
Yeah, hey, Bill, I'll take that $1,000, but I just watched my retirement savings go down about 30%. I'm feeling the pain, so this is a hard conversation to have right now.
You have a Proto throttle.
Yeah, I've got my Proto throttle, so I'm.
So what if you're eating mustard sandwiches for a couple of weeks? That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to sway anybody.
In Scott's defense too, I mean, and not necessarily needing defending, but it depends on where you are in your hobby. I mean, if you're just beginning, you're not thinking about trying to have a locomotive brake stand. I mean, Dr. Muff up in Oregon or Washington, wherever he is, he took the actual front end, I believe, of an F7 locomotive and put it in his basement and then built the house around it, literally. And he sits in a locomotive cab and runs his railroad. That's extreme. But I think as your hobby evolves, as you evolve as a modeler, things change. I mean, I started off, I wanted to build structures. Then I wanted to do engines, and then I wanted to do cars, and then I did a railroad. And when I got all of that put together, I said, this thing needs to be more than a Christmas tree. I need to have it operate. And at that time, I was a switchman for the SP. And so I understood operations, at least somewhat. And I tried to make my railroad operate. And that's what I think you have to evolve to. Scott's not marketing to the beginner or even the intermediate modeler. He's modeling to a modeler who has a railroad that's ready to actually move cars like the prototype. And for that, trust me, that thing looks like a brake stand on a locomotive. My guess is, I haven't actually had one in my hand, but my guess is it feels like one. And certainly from what he said about how it operates, it certainly would operate like a real locomotive stand, control stand would operate. So he's given us the opportunity to actually feel like we're in the cab. That's what he said at the very start. It's there. And if you're at that stage of your model railroading career, your hobby, then hey, it's a great thing to have an opportunity to bring into your operating scheme and make you feel more like you're a real engineer.
Yeah, that's true. I'm trying
said.
to, yeah, very well said. Andy, let's see. I'm trying to figure this line of questioning. Andy Crawford says to Lloyd, in fact, I would say, if you're not into prototype operations of a locomotive, then you won't like it, regardless of the price, as it emulates real functionality.
That's right.
Call IMRO.com says, if I was a two-rail O scale, I would be game, but for N scale operations, I do not think it fits well. And Andy Crawford is again saying, it's not about cards and train operations, but if you like running a locomotive the way the real locomotives function, then it's awesome.
Right.
And he continues to say, I could see that, Eric, but I've operated N-scale layouts that would be enjoyable with this Proto Throttle. Andy Crawford, you got it. Inside the cab operations versus railroad operations, yes. And then Sparky replies, but at Andy Crawford, it is about operations. This is the whole thing they talk about, prototypical operation. Yes, that is true, Sparky. It is about operating. But like as Miles just said, it's not for the newbie, nor is it for the intimate middle level guy, but for the guy who's got the layout where he wants to have that actual. He's been operating prototypically, on his layout with his NCE or Digitrax. This is just an added component to to give more realism to the operations. Andy Crawford continues, says, I think it's all about what your interest is. If you're turning trains on and watching them, then the knob is fine, preferable.
Mm-hmm.
If you want a local to run like a local, then it's awesome. John,
well, and I want to say that, Bill, you and I talked about this, and so you can tell it from your side. I'll tell it from mine. But you climb up in the engine some night when you're operating as a switchman, and the engineer suddenly says, "I need a nap because I was up all day. Run the engine for the crew." And I don't care whether you're the switchman or the foreman. All of a sudden, you're the engineer on the job. And Bill, I know you had one time where the engineer was actually so inebriated that he couldn't run, and you wound up running the locomotive. So, sometimes you need one of these throttles out of necessity. What can I say?
You're exactly right, my friend. You're exactly right.
Now, one thing I'll say.
And wait, okay. John 2618 agrees with Miles. Eric Hall, IMRO.com, and I thought Miles had a full-scale steam engine in his basement and had a shovel coal to keep his layout.
I upgraded to diesel a few years ago.
Yeah, so he's got
that's not an upgrade.
Yeah, he had to put a scrubber system in.
That's right.
The thing with the diesels. Ralph Renzetti had to go. He says, good night, guys. Have a good night. And he says, thank you very much, Scott.
Oh,
Spark
thanks, Ralph.
7107 says, it is a great looking throttle, and with operating a locomotive just like they would a real locomotive, everyone's dream. But it is for the person that can say, my layout is done. My layout is done. What is next? Question. I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think it's the final period at the end of the sentence. I think that this hobby is evolving each and every day. I mean, obviously, Scott and the team at Iowa Scale Engineering have, taken it a step further. So I think that, I don't think it's the period at the end of the sentence or my layouts. I think all of us understand that the layout is never truly.
One thing too, Bill, if modelers who are not that familiar with the throttle want to see it in action, they can simply go to YouTube and Google or type in Proto Throttle, and there'll be a whole bunch of videos that come up that show guys showing how they use it on their layouts. You can also go to our website, iascale.com, click on the Proto Throttle and scroll down the page and you'll see videos there. And there's also a fella, I believe he's in Canada. He's got a nice sized O scale layout. He's on YouTube, and his call sign, if you will, is GP9UM. And if you go to GP9UM, he's got some nice videos of his layout in action with the throttle, and those are kind of fun to watch because then you can see how guys are using it.
Okay, that's a good point. More feedback on this. Let me see if my layout is far from done, Andy Crawford says, but I'm now designing the layout around these types of operations and about slowing the engineers down. Lloyd says, again, if you have no idea how a locomotive works or sounds, any throttle will do. And try and operate prototypical, but I don't think this throttle will change anything. Well, I tend to disagree with that, Lloyd. I think that there's a lot of things that I don't know, but I'm going to try it, and I think it does make a difference if you.
Now, I'll interject again, Bill. I think what Lloyd's saying though reminds me that some layout owners who have bigger layouts, they've purchased one or two proto throttles to use for primarily switching on their big layouts. And then they have the rest of the controls, just the standard DCC controllers. And that's great because then these guys get to introduce a lot of their operators to control stand operation. And the throttle is more attuned to switching, obviously, than just strictly over the road running, even though we have modelers who use it that way, and that's fine. But it really shines when you're switching. So,
yeah, that your throttle would work well on my layout because my layout is a complete switching layout.
Oh yeah, we'll look for the order next week, Bill. So
absolutely. It's something I'm, well, I gotta talk to the wife.
Yeah, there you go.
Listen, Scott, Miles, and everybody else, I wear the pants in this house. They're her pants.
Yeah, we all understand.
Is she visiting the relatives right now, or what?
What's that?
Is she up visiting the relatives right now? She must not be there.
No, I have the door to the train layout room closed, and it's so, let me tell you something, boys. I'm the king of my castle. If I said that,
so long as she lets me, yeah.
Yeah, just say that in a hushed voice.
Yeah.
Don't get too loud.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, Bill. Eric Hall says the Bill will have $1,000. He'll place his order for 2. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we had one guy who has 10 of them. So
10 of them.
10. Yeah.
10.
He's got a big layout, and he bought 10 of them.
God bless him.
Yeah, that's what we said.
Yeah. Augie 107 says the real thing will be the money. Do I buy a throttle that is awesome? Make the dreams parallel with the reality? or do I buy track switches? And oh, that logo they just released.
Oh yeah.
Well, sometimes you got to put our dreams on the back burner for a while, and you know.
Who was it that just released? Was it a big boy that was retailing for about $900? What didn't somebody just release one like that? Do you know,
Yeah.
Miles?
Thanks. Yeah, somebody did. HO.
Yeah.
You're talking to an O gauger, so I don't keep up much on the HO stuff.
Talk about Bill. Talk about the guys who spend money. It's those O gaugers, you know.
Yeah.
I know nothing.
Sparky says, "Don't get me wrong, I want one. Be so cool, but price point will hold me back. I hope it's not a fad and the throttle is not available in the next year. Just need time to buy this one." Then he goes on to say, "Did I say I want one?" What should be also noted here that Iowa Scale Engineering does not just produce this Proto throttle.
That's right.
They
That's right.
produce other equipment and other variable things that are pretty cool. I was going over their website. They have an extensive list of inventory to purchase, infrared signaling underneath the train tracks to track trains, and other stuff that is comparatively priced and competitively priced for other things. And also, if you want, what you can do when you go on the Iowa Scale Engineering site, they sell the knobs in different colors. So if you want to start by purchasing one of those knobs first for $9.99, you're in the game, and then
Yeah, good idea, Bill. Yeah, get the knob and then just.
And they sell faceplates too.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, all right, we've lost the thing. Sparky wants to know, so are they going well, here's a projection question. So are they going to continue sales and productions in, say, 5 years, 10 years?
Hard to say, I mean, we'll always support our customers.
2 years even, he says, 2 years. See,
yeah.
I always go by the thing. Tomorrow is promised to no one. I mean, I hope that we all go forward, but I would like to think that they would go forward. I mean, I can't answer for you.
Yeah.
Market course for. I don't think it's a fad. I really don't. I think, if we go back, I'm going back to and Miles you can add to this. Back in the 1980, on the 1980, I was building my first layout downstairs in the basement. It was a dog bone layout. I would get Model Railroading magazine religiously, and in it they were talking about DCC, and I remember reading John, Tony Kessler, all these guys talking. Is this a fad? What is this going to do for the hobby? How is this going to? And I remember being with the guys in my model railroading club, and they were saying, this is just a fad. This isn't going to last. It's just something we got to do the old true tried works, and this isn't going to happen and such. And, everybody that has a naysayers, because change is, Mark Twain said it best. He says, "I don't mind change. I hate it." And it's true. Change in any form or in technology and lifestyle and anything, when you're diagnosed with diabetes and the doctor says you can't go to the ice cream store like you did and get 2 for 1 on it changes your lifestyle. So I remember DCC was the same way. People were like, this is good for the hobby. It's not, it's a fad. But then I got out of the hobby till about 2010. Back into the hobby, I couldn't believe the progress and the innovation and the inventions that had taken over. And I found it to be exhilarating, and that's my personal opinion. It was exhilarating to come in and the NCE at the time was about $400, the whole package, or $200 and something, and whatever they're going. And I bought it. And I was happy that I did, and I didn't have to deal with on-off switches and track layouts and blocks, for my layout, so the train can run continuously, by throwing the toggle switches on the board that would take up half the room. And then here we are with this, the next phase of DCC into the Proto Throttle area. Obviously, if you're doing diesel, gives you that sense of realism, if you will.
Yeah, there's a fella and his team in Australia that's trying to develop a steam version of the Proto Throttle. So we'll see how they're doing. They're blogging about it on the Model Railroad Hobbyist site. So if anyone's interested, and it just makes me think the comments you're making, Bill. And here we're watching Miles 3D print things as we speak, and he's got his 3D printed models right on the screen. I mean, it's a great time to be a model railroader. Heavens,
Well, look how great it is. Look, here we are in the midst of this virus that's sweeping the world, and here we are. 25 years ago, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing now. You're in Iowa, Ames, Iowa. You are in Missouri. John is in Georgia, and I'm in New York City. Plus, we have all over the world, people coming in and contributing to this conversation. So yeah, it is exciting to be a part of this hobby right now. Because, Miles and I were talking about it the other day, and now we're getting out of the basement. We are finally coming to see the light.
Right.
And stepping upstairs and it's like saying, hey, there's a life out here, and we're doing things, and this is one of them. I applaud you, Scott, for taking the initiative and the idea and saying, hey, this is something, let's push forward on this and go forward with it. And I can understand Sparky's hesitance. He says, I asked because today I can get one, but he says, I can't get one today, but tomorrow I can. So will the company be there to ride the sales or stop when it has died out? Will you build and sell when demand is down? Well, obviously, the answer to that, if it's down, then if it's not making money, then that's what capitalism is. You can't sell if you're not making a profit. But I'm sure that, and I understand the trepidation. I understand. What you're saying there, Sparky. But
again, Bill, we're three guys that all have full-time jobs, and we do the Proto Throttle as a side adventure, and we enjoy it, and we're selling enough right now to justify keep going. But like you said, you never know what the future holds. But I think it's important for people to understand this isn't our full-time gig. This is just something we do for the hobby, and we enjoy it because we think it's going to bring a lot of enjoyment to diesel modelers.
Put something to the table, again, I compare it to a buffet table. You bring it to the table, you take what you want, you go back for more.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, he says he has. I'm sorry, Miles, go ahead.
One thing I always want to reiterate is the fact that it is U.S. made. It's made by U.S. citizens. And I'm proud to say that I worked with KD, I worked with Intermountain, I worked with Woodland Scenics. And in all of those cases, the general corporate attitude was that they would not discontinue something, that once they made it, they would continue to make it. And certainly that they would continue to have parts and back it. And I think that's kind of an American viewpoint rather than maybe viewpoints from other countries. And I won't name any specifics because it's more general than that. But a lot of companies, they are of a mind that once this thing stops being profitable, we don't back it, we don't do anything. I know that customer service is a biggie with me. I'm really impressed with the Prusa printer because their customer service is 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 a year. And when you say that you stand behind the product and you're an American, telling me that, I believe it. And I would rather send that money to you than any place else. And I think we all need to remember that, first of all, we need to back ourselves, and then we'll worry about others who are providing for us or whatever. But that's my soapbox for,
No, that's a good point. That's a good point, and I agree with that. And not just because I'm a producer of the Proto Throttle, but I agree because that's the outlook I have too, Miles. I'm willing to put my money with U.S. manufacturers. Not that I have anything against products that come from China or other countries, but if people need to understand, if it's made totally in the U.S., it's going to cost a little bit more because you're like our machining is we pay American machinists to produce, and we pay uh, American companies who produce circuit boards to build them. We don't send them to China. So in a sense, the money that people invest in our products, at least, they're investing in other American companies that are supplying to us. So that is something to consider. And by the way, that your diesel looks awesome sitting there. I'm glad you're putting it together behind the scenes as we're speaking.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
kind of, I really am interested though in what you're saying. And the other thing that nobody's touched on, and there was a feeling when I got to run the engine and the real locomotive at night on my switch crew nights, and that is that you get the feel of the movement. And I think you're going to come closer to that feeling that you're, as Bill said, in control, that it's your train, that all of a sudden it's moving and it's yours. I think you're going to find that throttle is going to give you that feeling. It's like I used to tell the joke when I was telling people about painting backgrounds on the railroad. Go out to your shop or whatever, get a board, cut a hole in it, put your thumb through it. When you put your thumb through that and that board becomes a palette, you automatically feel like you're Rembrandt. Well, let me tell you what, you get that throttle in your hands and it's got everything exactly like the prototype. It's reacting like the prototype. You're going to get the feeling that train is yours and that you are in control of it. I guarantee it. It's just, well, mentally you're going to be there.
Well, I believe that's the experience too. And the other thing to factor in for some bottlers is it also enhances the social element, because if you go onto YouTube and you Google Proto Throttle, you're going to find a fair number of videos that show the Proto Throttle being used. One individual is the engineer running the Proto Throttle. Mm-hmm. The other is his conductor calling out the movements and that sort of thing. And that is just a boatload of fun, because you have two guys operating. And yes, we've had plenty of modelers come up to us at shows and ask, well, can I run it one-handed? Well, yes, you can, but it works better. Right. It works better to run it two-handed and then have a conductor. So there's a lot of modelers when they're doing their operating sessions who are having a blast interacting with another modeler with the operations. And that's another plus, I think.
I could see somebody putting a comedy video out on this and two grown men fighting over the throttle. No, it's my turn. No, you had it for 1/2 hour. No, it's my turn. I want.
Yeah.
Right.
Give it
that's
to me.
True.
Eric Hall, IMRO, says, well, the light or the news this week says that we should get back in the basement or the back room and just lock ourselves in the house because of what's going on. My wife reminded me the other day of something C.S. Lewis wrote once. He says, when the end comes, he wrote this in the 50s during the Cold War when Russia had the bomb and we had the bomb. He said, C.S. Lewis, the author, said that, he says, when they come to find us finally at the end, he says, let them find us amongst the things that we love to do, whether it was painting, whether it was a hobby, or whether it was with our families. Let them find us with what we love to do and not huddled in some bomb shelter and being fearful. And so I think that's most important in this day and age of what we're going through right now. I wish everyone out there the very best. Stay safe, use common sense, and stuff like that. And Scott, I want to thank you so very, very much for being on the show with us tonight. And I hope to have you again. I really do, have you on again. It really, it was a very encouraging show. And and a very insightful thing about the throttle. You know, so again, thank you so much, and
Thanks,
thank
Bill.
you
I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're quite welcome. It was my honor. It was our honor and our pleasure. And as always, Miles, it's always a pleasure having you on the show.
Well, I want to say kudos to Scott for pushing this project through and making it happen, because
Yes,
there's a lot of people out there that are a lot happier because of your efforts.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Michael and Nathan again, because without those two gentlemen, they're the brains behind the Proto Throttle. So it's a team effort, and we hope to introduce it to a lot more modelers. So thanks a lot, guys, for taking the time to want to talk about it.
Greatly appreciated. And Sparky writes, I don't mean to take the low side here, but again, price point, I did say I want one, LOL, but you know, people just have to know you need DCC system and the Wi-Fi, then bothers throttle. You're absolutely right. But please do not, you know, you're Sparky, you're what fueling the Q&A, and you know, that's what we want, you know,
That's right.
So your question's not wrong. You weren't being disrespectful. Nobody was being disrespectful on the Q&A. So we just, you know, that's what we want. We want an open forum, and you know, you can tell I'm from New York, right? I talk like, you two guys are sitting there very like, you're not getting animated. I'm like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, we're passive aggressive, right, Miles?
That's right.
Cool. That's it. Lights out. Next.
All right.
No, I'm not that guy. I'm not.
Yeah, no.
Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Thank you out there in the community for tuning in. Because if you're not out there, we're just talking to dead air. Well, actually, we were for a little while.
Yeah.
For a different time. Again, I want to thank my guest, Scott Thornton, for coming on from Iowa Scale Engineering. Go check out their website. They do have other stuff available. And thank you to Professor Miles for once again being here and adding to the element and to the questions and making it as interesting as possible.
Get out of your railroad room. Let your trains put a smile on your face.
That's it. That's it. And to John, for a great job, John. Great job tonight. Even though we hit some hiccups and some speed bumps, you pulled it out once again. A good job. So kudos to Johnny Reb for getting this show off the ground and putting it all together. So with that said, we'll say good night. You guys out there, take care. God bless. And we'll see you on the radio.